Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the San Francisco 49ers 2024 NFL Draft Class based on data. So we're going to look at athleticism, production, and other statistical factors that determine how well the 49ers did in this particular draft class. Stay tuned until the end of the video where I reveal the final grade for the 49ers. But with all that stuff out of the way, let's get to the video, guys. So, first off, in terms of the needs for the San Francisco 49ers, the biggest things you can see right here is NFL positional AV, which is the how they actually have performed based on approximate value. The data grade takes a look at how they tested pre-draft in terms of like the pre-draft profile coming out of college. Based on the work that I do, typically most players who score 70 or higher, about 86 to 90% of long-term starters at various positions, from quarterback to running back, wide receiver, tight end, etc., even the defensive positions, they typically score 70 or higher in terms of their data grades. So when you look at these grades right here, kind of get that in your mind as we grade this draft class in terms of how well they tested based on their data. Okay. Now, if you want to learn more about these data grades and my system in terms of everything, go to my top 50 prospects video. The link is in the description in terms of that. But based on all the needs that are listed right here, again, this is pre-draft. When you look at the offensive needs, I would say one of the needs that they definitely need to address on offense is the tight end position and the offensive line position. Now, again, it's not that George Kittle is a terrible tight end. It's just that they need to add more depth to that position. They need to add more bodies behind George Kittle. Also, same thing with the running back position. Christian McCaffrey is getting up there in age. He's still a fantastic running back, one of the best, if not the best, running backs in the NFL. But as he's getting older, you also should consider getting some more depth at that position as well. If something were to happen, injuries, that kind of thing, you need somebody to step in. And again, it's not that the 49ers don't know how to find running backs. They definitely are very good at that. It's just that's something to kind of consider here. Then when you look at the defensive side of the football, the linebacker position, again, in terms of adding depth, that's one area that needs to be addressed. Edge, defensive tackle, another area that needs to be addressed. And cornerback, coming into the draft, they still graded out pretty well in terms of their overall defense. So I think that's going to be something that's really going to help them out long term. But this is kind of how things are shaking out for them. So when we get to the biggest factors in my final grade, so how I grade drafts is a little bit different from everybody else. I don't base it on my opinion. I don't base it on how I've watched these players. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. The vast majority of the players that I'm about to talk about today, I've not seen a single ounce of film on them. And again, it's not because film has no value. It's just I find myself to be much better at looking at data and finding players versus just watching the film. And again, I understand there's a lot of film watcher guys out there, people that just have to watch the film and grind the film and all that kind of stuff. Believe me, I've been there. I've done that. I spent one season grading almost 1,000 players one year. And the fact of the matter is, nobody cared what I had to think about that. Now, data wise, you're actually, you're not ever going to have access to the film of guys in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, but through data you have that ability. You have the ability to look at what the trends are in various eras and see if those trends still exist back then as they do today. And what I found is the same trends from a statistical standpoint exist from now as they did in the 2000s, as they did in the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, etc., so on and so forth. So again, you can deny the data all you want. You can say it doesn't matter all you want, but I've already proven it does matter. I've already proven the correlations with it. You just have to catch up to it, okay? Now, again, how I grade drafts, I look at did they meet their roster needs? So did they at least draft some players to kind of fill some needs on the roster? Did they draft good prospects? Because if you don't draft good prospects, you're going to be drafting again in the future. How do I define a good prospect? Is a prospect that has a 70 or higher data grade. I'm not going to get into the film and whether or not they can translate or not and all that kind of stuff. I'm just getting into the bare bones. Hey, 86 to 90% of long-term starters typically scored 70 or higher. So if a guy doesn't hit that area, that's increasing your chances of not hitting on that prospect. Okay, it doesn't mean that it's unbeatable. It doesn't mean that because a guy scores 70 or higher, that doesn't mean he's going to, not end up being a bust. He still might end up being a bust. It's just that it increases your chances of hitting at that position. And then the third area to think about is, did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? As you pick lower in the draft, the chances of those prospects hitting becomes less and less and less and less the further down you go in the draft. So if you know already that drafting a 70 or higher draft prospect is going to increase your chances of hitting, and then you draft a guy in, say, the 6th round who has a 50 percentile data score, that's that's a wasting a bet. That's as I say sometimes, it's betting on 22. Instead of, when you play roulette, you have red, you have black. Instead of betting on red or black, you bet on 22. It's just a much higher standard to reach, statistically speaking, in terms of probability, compared to betting on red or black. So, with all this stuff out of the way, let's get to the first pick for them, which, again, based on data, not the best, but again, let's look at it. So, starting with the first pick for them, pick 31, Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver out of Florida. His data grade was 67.06 out of 100. His floor, so most prospects, what the floor grade is, every prospect who tested like Pearsall in that pick range that he was picked in typically had a 70 percentile AV in their career. That was like the average AV. Some of them did better, some of them did worse, but that was typically the AV of a prospect taken there. Now his balance grade is 68.75. His pick AV is 88.80. So this is the pick AV is what the average AV is for a prospect taken at 31. So if you just randomly blindfolded yourself and just picked out of a hat all the players taken at pick 31 and looked at what their AV was, they would average about 88.80 out of 100. So right from Jump Street, the 49ers made some selections that, again, weren't the best. Now, does that mean I'm not a big fan of Pearsall? Yeah, I've seen some highlights of him. I think there's some interesting stuff with him. But let me at least get into why he's risky, okay? Just hear me out. That's all I'm saying. Just hear me out. So, overall pick grade for this would be a D, but the reasons why are this. When you look at his production data, you look at his receiving market share, his total offensive market share, and his touchdown market share. This is essentially his percentage of yardage per the team, percentage of touchdowns per the team. This is based on a sample size of 3,710 wide receivers since the 1969 NFL draft class. So this database goes by far. It has every single wide receiver you can think of over that time span. And based on this data, all the All Pro players typically averaged in the 90 to 80 percentile in terms of those data points I just mentioned. The Pro Bowl players also were in the 80 percentile to 70 percentile. The starters were in the 80 to 70 percentile. So from Jump Street, Pearsall is not within the averages of the wide receiver position for most long-term starters at the position. So again, he's below average. He's below average what a starter is. He's below average what an All-Pro Pro Bowl player is. And because of that, that's why his data grade is what it is. Moving further to his efficiency scores. So this takes a look at touchdowns per touch, yards per reception. Take a look at this data, right? The starter averages, the All-Pro averages, the Pro Bowl averages. Most wide receivers typically had above average yards per reception in college and touchdowns per touch in college. Pearsall, not so much. Okay? Now, moving on to a positive though. So he does have good athleticism traits. 79 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 68 percentile in terms of speed, and 90.95 in terms of flexibility or change of direction skills for him. So really good athleticism when you look at his overall profile here. Tested similar to Cooper Kupp in terms of his athleticism traits. So you do have that kind of stuff going for him, athletically speaking. I can see why, if you were just looking into his athleticism traits and looking at his highlights, that you would go, yeah, that's a first round pick. But this is when you have to get to adjust the production traits. Because I know what a lot of you guys are going to say. You say, well, Jim, you played at Florida, man. Like they had tough competition there, and the quarterback was terrible, and this and that, and all that kind of stuff, right? Look at this. This adjusts for his level of competition, for the team that he was on, and his age. So adjusted production adjusts the production for all those factors, and based on this, when you look at the starter averages, the Pro Bowl averages, the All Pro averages, not quite near those areas at all. So his age score in particular is 9.34 out of 100 in terms of his overall age score. His 65.17 is his MSA rating. His pass rating is 58.48. And again, I know there's a lot of people talking about the NIL transfers and all this kind of stuff. Listen, the data has been this way for a long time. If Ricky Pearsall was this amazing of a wide receiver in his collegiate career, he wouldn't have had a transfer to Florida. He would have already been on the radars and would have already been drafted by now. I hate to break that to you guys, but it's just facts, okay? It's just is what it is. So I understand a lot of people want to bring up NIL and this and that. If they were doing so hot at their school, they never would have transferred. If they had the attention of NFL scouts based on their play prior to that transfer, they never would have transferred. So I understand that people want to bring up transfers and this and that, all this other kind of stuff. Again, this data is since 1969. Even when players typically stayed in school longer, the younger prospects that were more productive at a younger age typically became better players long term in the NFL. So again, this is not to discount Pearsall in what his potential is at the next level, which I think is a long term starter. I think that's the best case scenario for him. But if you're talking about future All Pro player, future starter player, and I'm talking consistent All Pro, Pro Bowl player, year in and year out, putting up Julio Jones level production. That's not what he is. So again, don't make me mince my words. Consistent. So the career that I really see him having is probably like Calvin Ridley. He's going to be a player like that. But again, when you look at his overall career, I don't think he will be as good as people expected him to be. But again, Calvin Ridley at pick 31, can't hate on it, but it's not exactly the best that it could possibly be, okay? Now, pick 64, Renardo Green, cornerback out of Florida State. His data grade was 79.52 out of 100. His floor was 65.45 with a balance grade of 72.48. Pick AV was 79.52. Overall would be a C plus. So he's almost a B. If you round up, it's a B. When you look at his production traits, above average solo tackle data, below average interception data, with slightly above average pass deflection data. So has some above average production traits at the cornerback position. Then, of course, you look at athleticism traits, near elite speed, above average explosiveness, below average flexibility or change of direction skills. So athletically speaking, not really near the starters in terms of his change of direction ability, but could still become a starter. I mean, he hits all the numbers that you really want to hit in terms of that particular area with the exception of flexibility. Then, of course, you get to adjusted production traits. So adjusted production-wise, not quite near the starter averages, the all-pro averages, and the Pro Bowl averages, but this is still a solid all-around profile. So again, nothing against Renardo Green, a solid cornerback prospect in every stretch of the imagination, but not exactly anything amazing. And that's nothing against him. This is a very weak defensive class, but this is definitely a pick that has a little bit more risk than you would like out of a selection here. Then, of course, we get to pick 86 and Dominique Puni, offensive tackle out of Kansas. His data grade was 76.57, floor is 70.98, balance grade is 73.77, with a pick AV of 67.18 and overall pick grade of a C. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, 91 percentile in terms of flexibility or change of direction, good above average explosiveness with below average speed. This profile does look a little scary when you look at the speed score, but keep in mind that the 49ers kind of run more of a zone blocking scheme, if you will, and that scheme typically relies on explosiveness and really good change of direction skills, which is what he has. So short area change of direction ability, he's got that. Leverage ability, he's got that. Lower body power, he's got that. So again, not somebody that you're going to be pulling out in the open with, but somebody that could definitely hold up in sort of a zone blocking scheme. So I think he's good from that perspective. Then, of course, we get to pick 124 and Malik Mustafa, safety out of Wake Forest. This is probably my favorite draft pick of the 49ers. So I know we had some doom and gloom at the beginning, but if you are still here, great draft pick here. Data grade 93.31. Floor is 57.51. Balance grade is 75.51 with pick AV of 64.48. Overall pick grade would be A. Okay. Now, why is he a A? Well, let's take a look. Really good production traits. 83 percentile in terms of solo tackle data. Below average interception data, but really good pass deflection data. 99.82 in terms of pass deflection data. So really great in terms of making plays on the football. Exceptionally well in that. When you look at athleticism traits, 97 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 79 percentile in terms of speed, and did not really track anything in terms of change of direction ability. But these are good, really good all around traits for him in terms of athleticism. And then when you get to adjusted production traits, adjusted production, pass score, age score, all those areas are fantastic. So Malik is probably the best draft pick the 49ers made this year. He's somebody that has the potential to become a really good long-term starting safety, maybe more like a strong safety, free safety, hybrid maybe in that sort of area, but he has a really good overall profile for them. So I'm excited to see what happens with him, but his data overall looks fantastic. It really does. Then, of course, you get to pick 129 and Isaac Wurindo, running back out of Louisville. Data grade 68.53. Floor is 45.88. Balance grade is 57.20. Pick AV is 40.54 with an overall pick grade of a D+. So, why is it a D plus? Well, when you look at his market share data, below average, so below average total offensive market share, below average receiving market share, below average touchdown market share. He was mainly a rotational back in college. At Louisville, at Wisconsin, he was not the main starter. He definitely flashes things here and there, but again, not the main starter, and as a result, his production is not what you would expect out of a starter, Pro Bowler, or All Pro player. Now, when you look at his efficiency scores, really good efficiency. His touchdowns per touch, great. Yards per reception, great. Yards per touch, all those areas are fantastic. So, despite the fact that his market share data wasn't the best, he did at least have good efficiency. So, it tells you that okay, if you gave him the ball more, he might have been more productive. So that's the biggest thing that this really points out. Athletically speaking, he's the best athlete at the running back position in this particular draft class. 98 percentile explosiveness, 99 percentile speed, 96 percentile flexibility. These are ridiculous athleticism traits. It's not surprising that the 49ers might draft a player like this because they do like to tinker around with players like this. So good athleticism traits all around. But again, his production is a little suspect. Then, of course, you get to adjusted production. So adjusted production wise, he's also older. So he's not a really athletic young running back prospect. He's a really athletic older running back prospect, and also not as productive as you want him to be. So based on all these factors, again, the starter averages, all pro averages, it makes him riskier. I mean, that's why he's a D plus. So he does have some positives to him, but he is a little bit more of a risky pick. So again, he's more so in that 10 to 14% pile in terms of long-term starters. He would have to kind of be an outlier to become a long-term starter at the next level. But if there was any team that could take a guy like this and turn him into a starter, it would be the 49ers. It really would. So again, I'm not trying to, hate on it too much. I'm not really even trying to hate. I'm just telling you what the data says. But he is definitely somebody that has some risk associated with him. Then, of course, we get to pick 135 and Jacob Cowing, wide receiver out of Arizona. His data grade is 44.11. Floor is 29.42. Balance grade is 36.76. Pick AV is 54.83. Overall pick grade would be a F. So why is he a F? Well, look at his production traits. Production not quite near the starter averages, Pro Bowl averages, All Pro averages. When you look at his efficiency scores, Efficiency, not there. Touchdowns per touch, yards per reception, not quite there. When you look at athleticism traits, above average speed, did not have above average explosiveness or above average flexibility. So he's not a A+ athlete at the position, which is a little bit of a concern when you take a look at his overall data. And then when you look at adjusted production traits, again, adjusting for everything, not quite near the starter averages either. So again, this is a player that's more likely to be in the pile of, I wouldn't say busts, but players that are probably going to be backup rotational types. So again, not trying to hate on it too much, but it is what it is. He's a player that's more of a backup rotational player based on his overall data. Then, of course, we get to pick 215 and Jarrett Kingston, offensive guard out of USC. He had a really good data grade, 93.28, 57.66 in terms of floor. Balance grade is 75, and his pick AV is 9.65. So most prospects taken at 215 end up being 9 percentile NFL players, which is pretty much non-existent NFL players. Overall pick grade would be A. So when you look at his athleticism traits, really great, fantastic, 89 percentile, 90 percentile, 95 in terms of his overall data in those different athletic categories. This is kind of what you're looking for in terms of a late round pick, somebody who has experience, athleticism, and those other sort of factors. So I'm excited to see what happens with him. And he is going to be somebody I think could eventually, possibly become a starter for them long term. There are some positives there that indicate that. Then, of course, you get to pick 251 at Tatum Bethune, linebacker out of Florida State. His data grade is 69.83. Floor is 38.18. Balance grade is 54. And pick AV is 3.47. This pick would be a D+. Again, almost a 70. He's almost there. He's like this close. If you want to make him a C player, go ahead. But again, he's this close to being a C player. When you look at his production traits, a really good solo tackle data, sack and TFL data, not the best, but definitely within range of good possibilities. When you look at his other production traits, his pass deflection data, for example, okay. His interception data, really good, and then his forced fumble data, average. So, but not bad, not a bad overall market share production profile for him. Just not really elite. When you look at his athleticism traits, below average explosiveness, below average speed, and above average flexibility for his size, 59.55 to be exact in terms of his change of direction ability. So that's definitely a little bit of a concern. And when you look at adjusted production traits, really good adjusted production. His age, MSA, pass score puts him within the starter averages. So he's somebody who has suspect athleticism, but when you look at his overall profile, this is somebody that could become a starter. So I do like him from that perspective, but he is a little bit of a risky selection. Overall final grade for the 49ers would be a D. I think I've given more D grades to the 49ers this year than every other draft pick. And don't feel bad about this. Most of my grades this year have really been C's and D's. And that's because I grade teams differently from everybody else. I mean, I'm not just going to give A's to teams that had the best draft class out of 32 teams. I'm going to give A's to teams I actually legitimately thought they put in the value, got the talent, got everything, to get an A. So I am a very hard grader, just so you know that going into it. But overall, did they meet all the roster needs? I would say yes and no. Did they draft good prospects? Yes and no. Did they draft prospects that had the data potential to outperform their draft status? I'll say yes and no. The 49ers had a decent number of potential starters, but the majority of their selections were either D or F grades. So again, when you look at this draft class, it definitely has some positives. There's a narrative that could be made about a lot of these picks, but when you look at the top of the draft, they just really didn't hit it out of the park in terms of getting really solid, high correlative prospects. They didn't do that. They got prospects that you're going to have to say your prayers and really believe in your ability as a developer there. So these are kind of the way everything shakes out with them. With all the stuff out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Jim Coburn. You can check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/jcoburn. Check out my ex, formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics. To see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, and subscribe. Leave a comment in the section below. If you like this video, if you have any questions, all that kind of stuff, be sure to do that as well. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.